My name's Beckett.
My name's Jasper.
If you like this video, hit like, comment, subscribe. Join the Peanut Gallery.
All right, hey, welcome to another episode of the Peanut Gallery.
Woohoo.
And welcome, Rachel.
Thank you.
Hey, so thanks for being here. You're like studying and
Yes.
doing schooling and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, glutton for punishment.
Yeah, glutton for punishment. So we got to know each other just so you guys can figure out why you're here. Because I think sometimes people watch the gallery and they're like, how do they know?
Yeah, who are you?
We just randomly stop people on the street and we're like, listen.
I was
do
trying
this
to
podcast.
explain to my college friends how I knew you guys or what the connection was. It was very difficult.
Very difficult. So you were my teacher in school.
Yeah.
Huh? My kid's teacher in school.
I taught your kids.
All right, so you taught here at the school.
Yes.
That's kind of how we got to know each other a little bit, and then went from there. So just tell me a little bit about what you're doing right now, and then we'll go into into some of the more difficult conversations that we're looking forward to crying through.
Yeah. So I taught at Mount Salem for 4 years. I taught grade 8. It was awesome. And then I sensed a call to continue learning and continue diving deep into God's Word. So I'm currently at seminary. I'm at McMaster Divinity College, and I'm getting my MDiv, my Master of Divinity in Biblical Studies.
Do you get a halo with that?
Wouldn't that be great?
I think so.
I think instead of the cap, it should just be like a halo, right? It's really holy. Yeah.
Oh, I'd get my master's just for that picture.
No, it's like a degree in holier than thou. No.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah.
Okay. So
easy breezy.
What's seminary? Because not everybody knows what seminary is.
Yeah. Okay. I've had to explain this, or I've tried to explain this to a couple people, and I think I've done it poorly. But
well, we're preparing to be disappointed, so carry on.
But it's essentially it's training for full-time ministry, and it's like Bible school, but at a higher level. So I already have at a master's level, right? So I've got my undergrad. I did a Bachelor of Science in Math at Redeemer and a Bachelor of Education.
It's science and math?
Yeah.
Was there nothing else available? Or
No, I chose that. Wow. Again, glutton for punishment. Wow. I chose it of my own accord. Wow. And and so now I'm going back for more school.
I feel intimidated.
Yeah.
How smart are you? Shoot. I'll reword these questions. All right.
No.
Okay, very cool. What's the goal? What's the thought process? You got 3 years to wait, but
yeah, I've got 3 years. We are going where God leads, and right now that is here, and I am a little terrified because I don't know what that looks like from there. It could be some branch of pastoral ministry or chaplaincy or back to the classroom with just a new set of skills. Yeah. And so it's one of the first times in my life where I don't have an end goal, and I'm learning that that's okay. Well,
and our church has been looking for a good pastor for years, so
I'll replace you.
Wait, what?
No.
Fine. All right, so what we're going to talk about today is an experience of losing your dad. Mm-hmm. And when we started this podcast, one of the things that we were hoping to accomplish was just to share stories. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that we've discovered as we talk to more people, you realize everyone's got a story, and some of it's awesome. And depending on what we're aiming for in a podcast, sometimes it's just like, man, their life is perfect. But really, when you get to talk to everybody, everybody's been through something. And it may not be the same. Mm-hmm. But we all struggle, we all suffer, and there's different points in our lives. And there's a journey, and those journeys are something that I think a lot of people are very quiet about, and it's hard. It's so then when you're going through it, you're like, I don't know what I should be feeling. I don't know how I should be responding. Like there's all that stuff going on, right? So why don't I stop talking? Why don't you tell me about your dad? Tell me about your family, and then we'll get into losing dad and going from there.
Yeah. So grew up in Elmer. Lovely little tiny home on 4th Ave and spent most of my growing up years there. And I learned afterwards that this was relatively rare, but my family was really solid and really stable. And so never for a second did I wonder, did I question that maybe my parents would get divorced one day, or that I couldn't wait to move out because I hated my mom so much, or, all those normal things that a lot of people go through.
Yeah, like that my teenagers
say
to me. Yeah. Thanks for bringing that up, Rachel. No, it's good. It's fine. I have no insecurity about that. Carry on.
But like it wasn't my experience, right? And so even in that, I was a very anxious kid. And so I remember like every single night, my room was in the basement, and I would say, "Good night, Mom. Good night, Dad. Love you, Mom. Love you, Dad." And then they would say, "Love you, Rach," and then they would turn off the lights, and that was the routine, right? Because I wanted, if something were to happen, and I always somehow imagined like our house burning down in the middle of the night or worst case scenarios, right? If something were to happen, the last thing I wanted it to say to my parents was that I loved them. And so yeah, like really solid household, but lived with this kind of worst case mentality. Just part of my personality.
So do you ever remember it not being like that? Because anxiety, for a lot of, I mean, it's become a more open conversation with people. But do you ever remember it not being there? Or did it just start? Or is it just something that you're like, I've always kind of felt?
Yeah, it was one of those things where I think I didn't have language for it until many years later, but I can look back on my life and relate a lot of the things I was feeling to what I would now call anxiety, right? Even from a pretty young age. Not that it like derailed my life, but there were definitely moments that it was very acute. And even things like I still am terrified of Halloween decorations for like very random piñatas as well, exposing all my insecurities. I know. It makes no sense.
So in your dreams, are you the piñata, or is it that you're beating a piñata?
It's a big group of piñatas that are chasing me.
Oh, now that is terrifying.
Or falling on me from the sky. Horrifying.
But are there candies?
No.
You got to think, maybe that's God literally throwing candy at you. Like, maybe God just loves you that much. He's like, she could use a Snickers.
I'm the chosen one. Yeah, well, no candy, just large piñata. Anyway, okay. So I remember these experiences kind of throughout my childhood years. My parents were amazing, are amazing. My mom was a principal here for like 20 years. Yep. So just doing the thing, like woman in leadership, and I never had any insecurities about who I was or where I might be called to be. And Dad was so funny and so solid and like a friend to the friendless, always. And so he worked, he did truck driving for a number of years. And then we were in Mexico for a couple winters.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. So 2 of the winters, my dad was finishing up Bible school at Steinrich. There you go.
Yeah. Are you even German?
No, I've lost
seriously?
it. Well, no, I can speak it, but just that word.
Do you still like tacos?
Yeah.
Okay.
Of course. So we went to Bible school for a couple winters, and then he was a pastor of a church for a winter, for an interim. And anyway, so I think it was around that time that he sensed kind of a calling to do something different or something more ministry-oriented, and was asked to be part of the Low German Radio.
De Brig. 1059.
Sei ha pai dai.
Yeah. German is such an awesome one.
It's
Sei
awesome.
ha pai dai.
So I think Ryan and I were like pretty little yet, and did like radio, I don't know what you call it, but the little the tags that tell you what station you're listening to.
Oh, really?
They might still have them, yeah. But anyway, so then he did the radio ministry for a number of years. And people loved him. It was awesome. It was so cool. He would tell all of our like family dirt and all of our all of our stories of like what mom made for dinner and whether it was good or not.
I have a daughter. She doesn't like piñatas.
Yeah, probably. But people, they felt like they knew him because he was so honest and just authentic, and he was himself. And yeah, so things were good. Started university at Redeemer University in 2012.
And he liked old cars, right?
Oh, he loved old cars. Yeah, he had a great like white truck, Ford something. It was nice. Everyone stopped him, said it was nice.
Apparently you didn't carry on that love affair.
No, Ryan's got it now. I'll let him have it. But yeah, so then second year rolled around, and so my grandpa passed away at the beginning of second year. That was my first experience with grief. He was older. But I was at school, so it came from a call from my mom, and so I started to kind of have this anxiety about phone calls. And then in September 2014, my Uncle Pete, my dad's brother, passed away really suddenly. It was like pancreatic cancer, I believe, in 3 weeks, and he was gone. So it was another call I got at school, and I remember like the panic attack that I had. And I remember thinking like, oh man, like, so that my Uncle Pete's family is one of my closest cousins, or a lot of their kids are all like our age. And so I remember thinking like, okay, now Dad is going to be the one to like help fix vehicles and things like that. And this sucks. I don't know how to walk with someone in grief. But our family will be there for them.
Right.
And could never imagine the ways that our journeys would be so similar. So January 22nd, 2015, the worst day of my life. I was at school. Dad would work at the radio, and then I think it was every other week he would go on a truck trip, transport truck driving, to help supplement the income, ministry life. Yeah. And so he was just leaving. I was planning to come home that weekend. I hadn't seen my family since Christmas. And so I think, I'm going to get this wrong, I think it was either a Tuesday or a Thursday. And it's weird. I've tried to replay that day, and I remember little snippets, but it feels like a full year in one day. We were having dorm dinner where we had like another full dorm come over and have some. We would make food together, and that in and of itself was God's provision, because he passed away around 4. And I didn't get the call till 6, but I had text messages from before I had heard. Because news travels fast in the Mennonite world. But at 6:09 p.m., my phone started going off. It was a miracle I heard it because it was kind of broken. It was really janky. And I remember like walking over and I knocked over a plate of brownie. And I was like, I'll clean it up later, right? And like that's like seared into my memory because it's just like the last thing that was normal. And went to the bathroom, picked up the phone, saw it was my mom. Had already been kind of anxious because the last couple of times she called unannounced was that someone had passed away. So I thought it might be my grandma or an aunt or uncle or something. And then she was sobbing and said, Rachel, I don't know how to say this. I don't know how to say this. And I was like, well, what? Like what? She said, your dad died. Your dad is gone. And you know those like outer body experiences in the movies? Yep. Yeah. I saw myself like break down. So we still don't know why. There's no real answers for some. He had some heart conditions that were discovered later, but for some reason he went unconscious and just happened to veer off the road. Right. And there just happened to be guardrails that his truck ended up on top of and smashed into an overpass and died. And it was the worst. Yeah. The worst. And then being far away, I was at school. Right.
And it's only an hour and a half, but that drive has to feel like 10 hours.
I still every time I drive past, there was like a Husky gas station on, maybe it's 195. I don't know. Anyway, a certain exit number, but like every time I pass it, that's where my family met up. And it was that first this is it. It's just 3 of us now. Yeah. And then go through the funeral and try to make it through. Everything stops. Everything stops. That whole first year is a blur. I don't remember a lot about it. I went back to school. Mom went back to being a principal after 3 weeks.
I remember because
right.
We work in the same building,
It's just you don't know what else to do, right? Like you don't know that it's okay to take time, and it feels like it isn't. It feels like you're going to explode. So she went back to school, and for a long time we're like, no, we got to be strong, and because he was such a public figure. Yeah. It was almost as if like other people in the community were depending on us to be strong for them as they went through their grief. Right. And so it was a joy to be able to grieve with so many people, but it was also really hard in some ways. Right. And then...
Because the person that would lead you through the grief
Yeah.
is the one you're grieving.
Yeah, the only thing I wanted to do was call my dad and tell him what happened. And I have so many text messages I sent off to him.
Yeah.
And because it was a truck trip and ended up doing like closed casket, so I never ended up seeing the body, which was probably a good thing, but I always just kept hoping he would come through the door.
Right.
Yeah, so
We need to do a pause here so I can clean up,
Yeah.
and then we'll come back.
Sounds good.
All right, we're back from our commercial break.
Light and breezy.
Yeah, because you know what? And it's one of those things that in a small community like this, a lot of us didn't experience a lot of grief. In terms of like, I don't remember knowing a lot of people that pass. And you went through almost a season where it wasn't like people didn't die, it just wasn't people we knew.
Yep, exactly.
And then when it hits, and it hits so close, and my dad's a truck driver, my father-in-law is a truck driver, right? And so it's all those connections. And so it's one of those journeys that for a lot of us, I mean, I didn't listen to the German radio. I'm sure I would have loved your dad that way. But, you know, right? And you begin to feel that as a community, and watching your mom go through that, and knowing you and Ryan and navigating all that. There's also a distant grief that you don't know completely what to do with, because you grieve, but you almost feel like you don't have the right to grieve either, because you're like, well, it wasn't my dad.
Yeah, right? No, totally. And I'm so thankful for that. Even now, like hearing stories about people, I know before we started, you were mentioning, Albert, that you remember that day. Like that is so meaningful to me. It's that it's not just my story to bear, right? But that other people are holding that space too. But yeah, it's what do you do when the literal worst case scenario comes true, right? And I was always always a planner, always like perfectionist, and so I'm like, I'll imagine the worst case scenario, and then it won't happen, but at least I'll be ready for like the little other things that will happen. But this time it did happen, and all of a sudden, all sense of control or the things that had mattered before just were like, what's the point? And it's funny now because I remember even that same night, which one says how much I was in shock, but also just kind of who I was, especially before. But the same night, I was like packing up my stuff and trying to like how do you pack up to go home for your dad's funeral? I was 20, Ryan was 18, like babies. And I remember my resident director was helping me, and I was like, Kate, I have an assignment due tomorrow, or like, who's going to tell my profs? And she's like, no, like it's okay. But I was so still focused on like trying to control the things I felt like I could control. And so I went back to school after a couple weeks, and because I didn't know what else to do. It seemed like the right thing. We moved forward, we pushed on, and I made it until, so this was January, I made it until March. And then I was like, I can't do this. Because I remember going to a concert of my favorite band at the time.
Who's the concert?
It was Pentatonics.
That's not bad.
Good one, right? Oh, yeah.
I was going to make fun of you, but Pentatonics, that's fine.
Good, right?
Yeah,
I was like an OG fangirl. That was my fourth show, right?
Wow.
I had like a bunch of my friends with, and they were like, are you sure you want to go, Rach? I was like, oh, yeah, like this will be, I need something good, right? And I went, and the whole time I wanted to run away. And I was like, this is going to affect everything. And for a long time, because by then it was like 2 months. It felt like forever. It felt like forever. Yeah. And so the rest of that year, I remember bits and pieces. By the end of 2015, I think it was that year still. Or maybe the next one, I was diagnosed with depression and went through some mental health stuff because it was just like, it took over my life. Yeah.
So one of the things from a faith standpoint, this really rocks your belief in God.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, you grew up in the church, and so did I, and so you're always told he's a good father, and he loves you, and he cares for you, and we sing songs about him being a good father. And
I hated that song.
It 100 times. That's what churches do. No, but there's something about that of believing that God loves you and cares for you that is so amazing.
Yeah. Yeah.
How do you go on with faith when the worst case scenario like this presents itself? Because you're in seminary now, so clearly I'm making giant assumptions that you haven't given up. But
no, yeah.
Why do you still believe?
I think when it happened, there were a lot of temptations to ask. I don't know if temptation is the right word. A lot of people asking why. Like, why your dad? You guys were such a solid family. Why you guys? Why this accident? Why the bridge? Why, like, unconscious railway bridge? Like, it seems like so many random things. Yeah. And I remember reading Job, which, like, classic grieving girl. but I remember reading Job in a new light because he has, like, chapters and chapters of, like, why? What is happening? And in his case, there's a reason, because there's this whole, like, battle between Satan and Yahweh, and whose will the faithful is God worthy of being faithful to. But Job doesn't know any of that, and he asks why and why and why. And finally, when God responds, he says, "Who are you?" "I'm God, you're not." And I used to read that and be like, that's a horrible answer. I don't like that.
Considering you're God, you could have come up with something better, but yeah.
But to me, it was just this confirmation, like, I won't know why in this life. But my faith was the one thing that I had to hold on to. And it's those moments of, like, my accomplishments didn't matter. My grades didn't matter. I was an RA at the time, like, even my relationships with my dorm mates or my friendships, like, none of that mattered. But the quiet, gentle whisper of God's grace was still there. And I pushed back against it a lot. And there was room, I found a new room to just be fully myself. There's one of the Psalms, I forget which one, how seminarian of me, but
clearly you're still first year.
I know. But it says, I cried out to the Lord, I cried with all my might, he listened. And I think sometimes as humans, desire and control, we crave solutions. And I think grief just reveals that sometimes there aren't solutions. Sometimes there's just the knowledge that I'm not in control. And I think for me, grief brought me way back to my faith, because how could I claim to be in control when the most uncontrollable thing happened? And not that God caused it, but that there is still more going on and that he is still good. Hated the song Good Father, Good Father for a long time. I was like, I want my father back. Right. I had a good father and he's dead.
Rachel singing her own version. I had a good father. Where's he? Where's he? Yeah.
And then people would say, like, really well-meaning horrible things about that he's in a better place, and that stung a lot. But I think in grief I found that Jesus is near to the brokenhearted, and that he blesses those who are mourning and those who are poor in spirit, and that somehow I wonder if, especially in a Mennonite culture, we have expectations of, like, I need to do all these things and then I can be in God's presence, and then I can understand who God is or be loved. And my grief journey reminded me in very messy, unpredictable ways that's easier to reflect on now. Like, there was lots of ups and downs, but that God asks for my emptiness. And there was something about grief that, like, I didn't have anything else to hide. I had nothing else to give. And so, God, if you want my emptiness, here it is.
Well, and I think the why question is valid.
Yeah.
But it's very it can become so overly consuming.
Yeah.
And it's so unanswerable because the deeper you dive into it, somebody else looks at your life and goes, yeah, I understand you lost your dad, but you had a good dad for 20 years. I never even had a good dad.
Yep, totally.
And so when you go down that trail, it can become very dark very quick. And I think we can get lost there and then miss all the life that your dad would have wanted you to have.
Yeah, totally.
Right? Like but when you're in grief, you need that time because it really does become all-consuming. It is all you think about.
Yeah.
And it's been so interesting. And the older you get, the more you understand it because you start losing people that are close to you, right? And so you lose someone and you're like, I've gone a week and I don't care to eat. I don't care to be with my kids. I don't care to anything. And it's so... Yeah, it leaves you honestly breathless.
Yeah.
Like you're like, I cannot believe that. I mean, I know you loved your dad, but the impact his loss had on you, I find when I talk to people, always still surprises people. It still surprised me how long it took, how hard it was. And the other thing that surprised me, and maybe it's just because we have grown up in a world where we have faced so little. We are lucky. We really are.
Yeah.
But I was talking so after Benny died, somebody came by. And she had lost her husband years ago. And she said, I still think about him every day. And she was remarried and she had kids.
Yep.
And I was just like, that love is a risky thing that way. When you love so deeply, when you lose that person, that's your whole life. Like you will never not think about your dad. You will never.
Nope.
And so grief is such a challenge.
Yeah. I've heard it described as, a ball inside a box. And that at first the ball is the same size as the box. It fills everything. And that ball is the grief and the box is the rest of your life. And so it's constantly bouncing around and it's hitting every single, everything. You want to have food? Oh, my dad hated lemons and now I'm thinking about him again, right?
Right.
And, I'm going to drive. I should get my oil changed. Oh, I wish Dad could be here and do that, right? Like everything. And as time goes on, the ball doesn't disappear, but it gets smaller. And so it hits less frequently, but when it hits, that's still the same intensity, right? And so when time heals, it does, but not always in the way that we expect. Right. And I don't know if time heals. I think Jesus heals, and some of that healing is that I still have the pain. And some of my fears actually in the beginning was I became really afraid when I started to not feel grief all the time because I'm like, am I forgetting my dad?
Right.
Yeah.
I remember there was a death in our church years ago when I was a kid. And one of the kids in the family at some point, like 3-4 days in, family was gathered around. There's some people laughing, and this kid just lost his mind. He's like, how can you be laughing like my dad? And it feels like that. The only way to remember him is to continue to always feel like that. And yet, for us in faith at least, we would describe our creation as being very resilient.
Yeah.
And God has given us the ability to go through trauma.
Yeah.
But He doesn't, and I think this is the challenge with North American Christianity because we have it so good. God just takes everything bad away. And then when something bad happens, we don't want to learn resilience. We don't want to learn emptiness. We don't want to learn all that. What we want is for God to just fix it now, and let's move on. And that's not the way the world works. And for most people, I mean, it's a luxury for us to be able to grieve the way we grieve.
Totally.
I mean, there's a lot of people who take 3 weeks off. What are you talking about? I got to put food on the table. I get 1 day off. Right? And so we are privileged in some of those ways. You have a secondary, intriguing part that we want to get into. And we talked about this ahead of time. So anybody's like, that's a rude question. I'm like, no, it's not. I asked her.
It's not rude.
But in a Mennonite culture, to be single past like 19.
Oh, yeah.
It's just like, so what's up, right? So that's been one of your life journeys. And so talk to us a little bit about that because that's been a part of that battle as well.
Oh, man.
What's up and like, what have you learned about intimacy? Because I honestly think that a lot of people who find marry somebody early on, they miss a level of intimacy that I'm finding in people who didn't have that. They describe friendship and they describe things that, they're not sex.
Yeah, yep.
But they're pretty awesome.
Oh, yeah.
And it's a different level of intimacy and friendship and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And in a Mennonite world, we can look down on that. We just do. Like
Totally.
I think we've come a long way.
Oh yeah.
And I know we're not, whatever. We can be
No,
there all day. We won't. But
I remember working at the asparagus grading station, and there were some really sweet old colony ladies I was working with, and they were discussing the best age to get married. And I said, well, 18 is the best, but 16 is good too.
Oh, snap, I got a 16-year-old.
I was 19 at the time. I was like, ooh, we have long missed that train. And so I remember too, I've always loved the fairy tales and the Cinderella. Right. And I was like, well, but I'm not silly. I'm not going to get married right out of high school. So 19 sounds like a great age. And then I got closer. I was like, oh, that's really young. And it didn't happen, right? And then I was like, oh, 21, and it didn't happen. And just turned 27, so entered into full old maid status.
Right.
No, but it's been...
I think old maid's a bit much, Rachel.
It depends on who you ask.
I guess.
No.
Some of my kids think I'm going to keel over soon. I'm already almost 40, so...
Right.
You die at 40, right? Or how long do you live?
Yeah. No, so it's been definitely something that I've wrestled with more than I wish I had. I wish I was someone who's really content with oh, I guess God has called me to singleness. This is great. This is wonderful. But I think for me, a lot of the struggle comes down to a fear of rejection and a fear that the longer I'm unmarried or without that one specific person, that is implicit rejection. Right. And that's a narrative that is for sure from Satan. That is not from God, but that I've had to push back against a lot and very, very poorly sometimes.
Sure.
So it's interesting. It's something I've thought about a lot as I get to the age where a lot of my friends are married or having babies, and which is a wonderful thing. It's the best ever. I love to be able to journey with people in those seasons. Right. But I wrote a blog post a while ago about that the things we celebrate especially in a Mennonite culture, almost always have to do with couples. You get a bridal shower and you're getting married, but I moved out on my own when I was 22 and funded my house from Dollarama. And you have a baby shower when you're having a baby, which is so important because that's a huge change. Right. But I wondered about I started teaching, and that costs a lot of money when you're funding your own classroom. And
despite, assumptions, private school teachers don't actually make a whole lot.
Not a ton.
It's kind of like a donation. Right? So,
it's like an honorarium.
Right. Eternal rewards.
Yeah, eternal rewards. Amen. That mansion's going to be good.
It better be good. There better be something.
No, so starting teaching and then now going to seminary. And I just wrestled with, and I have some really generous community. And so my mom actually threw me a gift card shower to start school, which is so, so gracious. But I think sometimes in singleness, in a community that emphasizes the family, which is so good. Right. It's such a great thing. Right. But sometimes there are people in stages of life who kind of get missed. And I think sometimes I've seen that people are not sure what to do with single people always. And
I was going to say, do you think it's in her awkwardness and to know, because you don't want to address the fact that somebody's suffering, because isn't it sort of the same way with grief? Well, at least he's in a better place, at least God gave you a gift of not wanting a husband.
Delight yourself in the Lord, and he will give you the desires of your heart.
Date Jesus.
Date Jesus. When you love the Lord enough, he'll bring someone into your life. That one sucks. Yeah, I've heard that one before. Are
you saying I don't love Jesus? What the?
And I was like, the 18-year-old is more spiritually mature than I am? That's really...
18-year-old? Like 10-year-old?
10-year-old, yeah.
What? Is that right?
Yeah.
Do you just think it's a lack of honesty in the fact that...
Yeah, I do.
And then also, one of the things in an earlier podcast, we were talking to Dave Miller and about his mom's struggle in not being included.
Yeah, yes. Yeah. And I think sometimes it's questions about I don't know what that looks like. And especially, I know some of my friends have families and they're really busy, which totally makes sense. But I would love to just be part of an evening when you're putting your kids to bed, right? To just be welcomed into your family as it is, not when it's perfect, not when it's
because then you're never getting invited
oh my
to
gosh,
my
well
house.
exactly.
I can tell you that much.
Yeah, not when things are neat and orderly, but just as it is. I think sometimes the thing that I've found hardest with singleness is that that when I need someone to call, I don't have one specific person who's like my person, right? And so, and I'm blessed, like I have a huge, wonderful community and do have a broadness of friendships and a depth in some of those that I think I've seen some of my friends who've gotten married really young who are still kind of looking for that and not sure what that looks like. And so I'm so thankful for my community. I wouldn't trade where I am for anything. Right. But there are times where like it gets really lonely even when you're surrounded by a lot of people.
Right.
And I know that can be true in relationships as well. I know that's not a just single thing.
So as I've been listening to a few of these, I'm always trying to think of like, make it personal and kind of. So what you're saying to me, if I'm hearing you correctly, and see, I'm learning to communicate. So I say things like that, like, if I'm hearing you correctly, invite you. Because often I think as couples, we would feel like, well, it's awkward for them. And so we don't want to put them in an awkward place. And so it's one of these battles of, I would have no problem in inviting you. But I also feel like you don't want to be with us. And so then it's just easier to just not.
I see. I wonder if maybe there's room to let and I'm going to mix metaphors, and either the single person or the grieving person, but to let them respond. But to have that invitation and say, hey, I'd love if you came over for family dinner. It's going to be messy. If it hurts too much, don't worry about it. But if you're in a place where that sounds awesome, you're welcome every Tuesday or this Tuesday or whatever. And I've had people like that where it's just they're not afraid to welcome me into the mess. And that's something I really, really cherish.
Well, I'm looking for someone to parent my children. So
Yeah.
if you're interested, every morning between 7:30 and 8.
Oh my goodness. That sounds I'm still sleeping.
Well, all right, well, the invitation's out there. I've done my part, Rachel.
But I think, too, I've heard some of my friends sometimes the assumption is that because I'm single, I don't have things going on that are as important as someone who's married or who's in a family.
Right.
And so, honoring that as well. That when I say I'm really swamped with school, that is different than being really swamped with a baby, but it's not like a lesser thing or a greater. And then finances is also something that's really finicky that I think a lot of people don't realize.
Right.
Even with OSAP, I would be qualified for twice as much OSAP funding if I were married, even without kids.
Which is ironic because then you'd have an income.
Then I'd have a second income, right? So now it's like I'm back at school. I have zero income.
But I mean, all that blows me away because everything the government's ever done has been efficient and accurate. So I'm shocked something doesn't make sense.
But it's little things like that too, right? Where even housing, like buying a house is, if I'm single for the next 30 years, I don't know if I'll buy a house, because it's just me. And so when I'm doing one thing, that's the only thing I'm doing. Right. But I have been learning to sink into the friendships that I have, and to take things as they come, and really to find. I know it's a cliche that they throw around youth group, but to find contentment in Jesus. I think for me, I know so much more about myself and who I am and who God has called me to be, and I am so much more confident than I would have been if I'd got married at 18, because I've wrestled through a lot of these things in a different way than I would have just knowing myself.
Well, I think the contentment piece is as challenging as it is. I think is something that for anybody who's a follower of Jesus must become something we strive towards, because there's a lot of people who are married and have kids and have everything. They're miserable. And they don't like their lives. And so I think that striving to be content where you're at allows you to enjoy when you get more. But I also think it can be thrown around as like, okay, well, I'm not going to feel bad for you because at least you still have a mom.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
People throw that in. And I think they're trying. I think often they're trying to help. But when you haven't gone through it, it's hard to know.
Yeah.
Right? So.
Yeah. It is hard.
All right, we're running out of time and we have way more to say.
Oh my goodness.
Last thoughts. I didn't go back to grief and close on grief. Last thoughts to people who are struggling right now. Christmas is a tough time.
Christmas is hard. Let it be hard. I think I put on a brave face for a lot of it. And it's okay for it to be hard. And I think when someone's grieving, I had some friends who were really nervous to bring up my dad because they're like, what if I'll make you sad? I'm like, I'm thinking about him all the time anyway. It is, and again, I know there's people who do struggle with that, but to let the grieving person take the lead, but to say, hey, if you'd love to share, I'd love to hear a story about your dad. Like, that's such an honoring thing because my memories are limited, right? There's no more pictures being taken. There's no more Facebook posts to laugh at. Like, I see the memories come up on Facebook or other social media, and they're so good. So the gift of something new is just beyond understanding. And yeah, holidays are hard. Yeah. Let them be hard. It's okay to not have a happy Christmas, and know that Jesus is reaching out, and you don't have to initiate that. Like, he's already the one reaching out, and your emptiness is enough.
Okay. Rachel, thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks for sharing. Thanks for all you're doing. I know that your life, and it is interesting, and none of us ever want to go through it, but these are open doors to sharing in a conversation that nobody else wants to talk about.
Yeah.
And so thanks for your vulnerability. Thanks for the work you're doing. Thanks for studying.
Thank you.
Honestly, you know what? Our churches are lacking in people wanting to pursue. So thanks for doing that. Thanks
My
for
pleasure.
taking a risk. Thanks for coming out. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you on the next one.